one's ontology or the ontology of a thing is important to come before an understanding of the epistemology of it. And what that means is that we need to understand the nature of the reality that we want to engage with in order for us to understand that reality properly and engage with it effectively. I wonder if I could, by any chance, have a drink of water. I don't know if it's the microphone settings, but my throat is going very dry. I don't want to start coughing, sorry. It's okay, no, really, it's not. It's just a precaution. Okay. So we're going to just take a quick look at some of the changes that have happened in more recent years. These changes, please stay focused, let's not get distracted. These changes have morphed, they've changed the context in which we all exist. And it is imperative, if we're going to understand the space in which we function, if we're going to engage with the world and the society within which we are called to and within which we must serve, if we're going to be effective in learning and knowing and influencing, it is important that we understand the world that we seek to influence. So some of the influences, some of the more recent social-cultural influences that I would like to highlight, this is by no means exhaustive. This is just highlights literally. So pardon me if I leave things out, as I will, that you consider to be important. But one of those influences is the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution is timed at somewhere around 1760 to 1840. It is actually considered by economic historians to be the most important event in all of human history after the domestication of plants and animals. In other words, after the basics required to survive and to remain alive, to subsist, it is considered, the Industrial Revolution is considered to have been the biggest or most important. Of course, you and I know that it is not the most important, don't we? We know that the most important event is the coming of Jesus Christ to this world that has transformed this world. But within the sort of secular sphere of things, the Industrial Revolution is considered that sort of big turning point or point of deflection. And it essentially signals the transition in human societies to new sort of manufacturing processes, the movement from handmade and manual and literal direct ways of manufacturing and producing things to more industrial scale, think larger scale production and development of goods and products. Okay, so we're talking about scale and we're talking about the means of production when we talk about the Industrial Revolution. Obviously, it relied upon and went along with innovations. Mostly, a lot of those innovations at the initial phase were in Britain. Inventions that made it possible to begin to scale up and to begin to mass produce products and to change the way that people lived, to change the way that people made a living, people earned, to change what people were doing, to change the face of the world, essentially. And these changes that were introduced in early sort of smaller measures or units have now exponentially grown and worked their way into almost every aspect of our existence, from the ways that we travel, to the ways that we cook, to the ways that we are entertained, to the ways that we communicate, and so on and so forth. The Industrial Revolution is something that changed sort of population levels in the world. It changed population levels because all of a sudden it was possible for people to earn a lot more than they were able to earn during sort of the more agrarian and manual ages. Suddenly people's income levels shot up beyond anything that it had been before, and people were able to maintain consistent levels of higher income. This led to being able to have bigger families and to have population explosions. It also led to the creation and the sort of evolution of capitalist economies, which we now think of as the main way that economies are organized in countries of the world. So I'm not going to go further on that. I'm just going to say that the Industrial Revolution brought about the sort of manufacturing of products, of chemical products, of iron products, of all kinds of sort of goods and products being manufactured on large scale. And that's changed our world in so many ways that affect us today, right to this room and our activity right now. Another one of these sort of highlight influences that we experience, particularly, let's view this from our lens as Africans and our lens as Nigerians, is colonialism, right? So colonialism is also one of those big influences that has come on the scene and has shaped and reshaped a lot of things. And in some ways, it has been sort of a carriage or a conduit for a lot of the innovations that came about through the Industrial Revolution, because through colonialism, a lot was shared, not just in terms of knowledge, but in terms of industry and the ways of doing things, of getting things done, of producing, and of working, and of living. Because colonialism has so many strands, which some of my previous lecturers here can probably do a better job of telling us about how, how colonial influences were combined with faith influences and have had a tremendous impact on the shaping of our society today. It is one of the important sort of foundation or cornerstones to the society that we live in and that we know today. We also, of course, saw the end of the colonial era in its literal manifestation in Nigeria in 1960, along with other nations in the world around that period that saw an end to that. And that also is an important point because it became another defining point in the history of the country. It became a time of the passage of responsibility. It became a time to test competencies. It became a time to test the internalization of values and of experiences that we had as a nation through colonialism, and it became a time to test our democracy, and of course, as we know, after colonialism, we started to see coup after coup after coup, and had all that instability leading up to the more recent socio-political world in which we find ourselves. But it also gave sort of wing to things to do with faith and with education and with culture. So we also have sort of the positive angles or dimensions of what colonialism and post-colonialism has brought and allowed or permits. We also have another interesting, number 4, sort of touch point in the shaping of our socio-cultural world today. The Christian movements, the massive Christian movements that have happened in Nigeria. And Nigeria, actually, did you know, I learned, I'm not sure if this is still current, but I think that this might be current still. Nigeria is the African country that has the highest number of practicing Christians in all of Africa. So up to 80 million Nigerians identify as Christians, which is probably 40–50% of the population of Nigerians would identify as Christians. It's also been estimated that a huge percentage, most of that growth in Christian influence has happened over the last 50-something years alone. So there's been a massive sort of surge and growth in sort of Christianity in Nigeria, and it all started much earlier on, of course, in the sort of 15th century with the sort of Latin introduction of Christianity, and then later on with the sort of colonial era and the activity of missionaries, and then more independent church movements, and then later on sort of the charismatic Pentecostal movements as well. And all of these have brought on millions and millions and millions of believers that identify with different or within different denominational setups. This has become a huge component, a huge artifact of our social culture in Nigeria, and a huge sort of culture shaping hub or point that affects all of us. We've also, number 5, urban migration. Urban migration is another interesting phenomenon that has shaped and is shaping our socio-cultural context. And the last time I looked at the data, I found that there were about at least 250,000 people were estimated to be moving on an annual basis every year, up to 250,000 people moving from rural to urban areas, obviously in response to the ideas of better working and living conditions. And sometimes it's the other way around. Sometimes it's been the urban swallowing up the rural by extension and by growth. So we've also got that sort of interesting highlight. Another highlight in the sort of shaping and recent formation of our social-cultural context is the introduction of telecommunication. Telecommunications. It's a huge one. Well, one of the pioneers of this, and probably the ultimate pioneer of this, is a guy called Mo Ibrahim. Mo Ibrahim is a Sudanese-British billionaire, he is. But he actually worked in telecoms in Britain for many years and had director and leadership roles in one of Britain's premier sort of telecommunications companies, and then moved back to Africa and started Celtel. Celtel was actually the pioneering sort of mobile telecoms companies that was built in Africa. And that was grown and extended and created all of these businesses with people selling recharge cards, and then got bought over from Mo Ibrahim, which is how he made his billions. Got bought over and developed a lot further than he'd taken it. But telecommunications was another sort of big turning point. I remember when we were younger, we had these really wealthy relatives, and they were rich enough to have a landline in their house, and that was really a big deal. And they had one of these landlines where you had to dial the number, so you kind of dialed 7 or 9 times, I don't know, and you know, but then you had also later on the introduction of mobile sort of telephones, and at that time it was super expensive. I don't know if you remember, but people paid massive sums of money to get a line. You had to get a phone, a SIM card separately from the phone, and so people were paying huge amounts just for the SIM card, and they didn't know that eventually you'd be able to get a SIM card for how much now?
Free. 17 naira.
Free. Someone said free of charge. So 17 naira. So yeah, it's just one of those things. So we've seen a whole movement, and right now practically everyone sitting here has a mobile phone. Somebody's recording.